Okay, so let's see.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Um, for I have a grade that's a 0 for a missed class makeup for a class that I was in. Should I turn that in? Did I mess up? Okay.
No, no,
Okay.
I just cannot assign that only to people who missed the class.
Yeah, okay, I
So,
get it.
so that's just ignore that. What will happen at the end is that all these zeros, I'll turn them into 100s because it's like
Okay.
you get participation mark.
Okay, thank you. I
Okay,
was
you're welcome.
confused. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, it is confusing. There is and I've talked to people who study can could do Canvas and kind of our tech support, and I can't really figure out how to do it any other way.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. So if you are back, if you could please go back and look at what we've discussed, kind of like why Andy Warhol is important, and also look at the term ideology that we discussed, if you could explain that, and interpolation. Interpolation, kind of how people get interpolated. We've talked about it, all of that last time. So if you could just kind of remind yourself, yourself while we're waiting, that would be great.
Is there any way that you can put me back in my breakout room so I can tell everyone that I turned it in?
Oh, let me try.
It's okay.
Who, like, I don't see you, so tell me your name first of all.
Abigail Lewick.
Okay, and do you of course don't know which one you were in, so.
I think you might be able to rejoin your breakout room. I don't know if that's true, but at the bottom of your screen, there might be something.
Join break. Oh, yes, I can. Oh, I can. Okay, I got it.
Okay,
Thank
great,
you.
thank you, Jen. Yeah, okay, wonderful. So we've got that. So we're going to wait for another 3-4 minutes to everybody to finish. So just so you know. So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to talk about that. Anything.
Who's your favorite artist of all time?
I have two. I have Edouard Manet from the 19th century, and I really like Marcel Duchamp. You know, the one that did the fountain slash the urinal. And I can tell you why. Like my criteria is for them to be very smart and do artworks that kind of are, I think, are smart and could be read at different levels. So that's kind of me. While we're waiting, what did you think about Jeff Koons? Anyone? The documentary on Jeff Koons? Mm-hmm. I have so much to say about Jeff Koons. You have no idea. But I won't.
I just had a quick question about where we're submitting the participation assignment. Is it under encoding and decoding the in-class
Yes,
participation?
yeah, exactly. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so I just gave a notice that the breakout rooms will close in a minute. Jen, Tommy, can you see if people are back? Because once I share the screen, I can't really, I may be able
There are
to.
96 people back.
Okay, so most.
Out of room.
Okay. All right, okay. Can you see my Canvas page here? Yeah, okay. So let me show you what I did. So this is where you are submitting encoding, decoding. This is where assignment goes. In addition to everything else, like we don't have enough. I've created this. These are the terms for chapter 2. These are the key terms that the quiz may test you on. Not everything from here is on the quiz. And what I also, this is for you, for your reference. What I don't want you to to just preoccupy yourself with this only. This is just one of the things to to think about and to remember. What I've also done is created, if you click here, there is a link at the bottom. And you all can edit it. So these are the terms, and I started defining them, but I will not do that all. I want you to do that. That could be your, your group project if you wanted to. Don't erase anything, don't delete anything. What I can do is I can go in every day between now and Monday and see if what people put is correct. If it's not correct, then I will delete it and probably provide the right explanation or something like that. Okay, so if you want to create that a study guide like that as a class, it's there for you. I will, as we go, I will give some of the definitions today, etc. Again, I would definitely advise you to read the chapter in at least twice and not preoccupy yourself too much with that. But this is a good thing to have. Questions on that? So again, every day from now, I will pop in and I will make sure that you've got, if you're filling it out, I will make sure that the definitions are correct. Okay, so now I want someone to tell me what do you understand as, in what does interpolation mean?
It's like when you're called to an image or like called by an image.
Great, thank you. Okay, so yeah, so that's you called by an image. You actually you respond to an image, and the image itself almost recruits you. It gives you some ideas. Your opinion, your ideas are influenced by this image, and we're all interpolated by various images and various ideas. Okay, so provided that you can see, so last time I said that we're going to kind of go over all this week. We've gotten to encoding and decoding. We're going to continue. Again, the idea is to go over several strategies of how meaning is created. So we're going to look at the audience and reception a little bit, and then go to appropriation and cultural production, and then reappropriation, bricolage, and counter bricolage. So we'll try to do all that. So we talked about Andy Warhol, and I'm just kind of looking at the examples here, because we talked about Andy Warhol as an example of someone who's taking popular culture and high art and kind of bringing it together and asking us how that changes how we look at things, how we what is the aesthetic enjoyment? Do we still have the same aesthetic enjoyment if these images come from very much popular culture, if they are mediated through newspapers or popular culture, et cetera, et cetera. So we've talked about Marilyn Monroe and the differences in typing and silk screening, et cetera. Okay, so this time around, I want to go and look at Barbara Kruger, a printer, an artist who utilizes interpolation. She is she's one of she's a photographer primarily, but she uses a lot of advertisement and a lot of strategies that advertisers use to create her work. So this is her, and she's still alive and well and works very hard.
We can't see it.
You can't see it. Okay, stop sharing. Share screen. Perfect. How about now? Can you? Okay, I don't know. I have nothing changed on my side. Okay, so this is Barbara Kruger again, and she's our example of interpolation, and she's a part of what you would call sometimes picture generation, a generation of artists that came to prominence in the 70s that were interested in photography and really elevated photography to the height of contemporary art. At the same time, they were very aware of what photography was, which it essentially, at that time in the 60s and 70s, photography was mainly used for creating advertisements. So they take that and they change that. Let me show you what I mean by that. So this is an example of Barbara Kruger's work. It was exhibited as a large billboard sign. It's not really, it's not a small kind of magazine cover or a photograph. It was created as a very large sign, and it said, and it's written in 1989. So we're kind of a second wave of feminism, closing to third wave. Your body is the battleground. And then there's here, it's an ad for a march on Washington Sunday in 1989, support legal abortion, birth control, and women's rights. So it is an ad, but it's not an ad that sells something. That's an ad that kind of almost of an activist action. Now, the way she does that, the interpolation comes from the way she uses photography and the font, because that font is one of the most used in advertisement, and it's still continuously being used. The same could be said about how she uses imagery. It's very crisp, it's black and white, the red is out there kind of, and this is her signature style. So she's She's conveying her message using the means of advertisement. So another work, Your Manias Become Science, about kind of, you know, fake science didn't come with the internet. It actually were created before. And she talks about, of course, atomic energy and atomic bomb, how fear becomes kind of creates fear mongering, creates science, which we may or may not need. The most popular of hers, you may have seen something, is I Shop Therefore I Am, where she's using that same font, that same red, black and white to actually kind of make us think about consumption, why we consume. And here we've got Kim Kardashian. She did this quite fairly recently. It's all about me, I mean you, I mean me, in For Women's Magazine, kind of the art issue of the Women's Magazine. So she's saying, again, she's kind of talking about what does it mean to be a woman at this particular time. And then I'm going to go through that very quickly. So have you heard of Supreme, that brand? So guess what? Look at the logo of Supreme. They see where they took it without asking. They appropriated, or they basically stole it, because she had used it, and at the same time, and this is where we go into copyright. Fonts cannot be copyrighted. The font and the kind of that cannot be copyrighted. So essentially, it becomes this gray area. And when Barbara Kruger realized, and she's older now, she's like kind of laughing about it. When she realized what Supreme did, she said, "What a ridiculous clusterfuck of total uncool jokers." That was her response. And instead of kind of, you know, she emailed them, she sent them letters, and they didn't respond, and she left it. She didn't pursue that. Instead, what she did is she created this skateboarding park that is in New York City, where she just created more of her own work, and needed by it, whose hopes, whose fears, etc. So she created that kind of to respond to what Supreme did. So her interpolation, the way she interpolates us is kind of in our ideas, is because it's very easy for us to recognize the words, the ideas. She's asking questions, she's not giving answers. The words are very easy to recognize that that's hers because of the font and the red, but at the same time, very kind of, they look very similar to advertising. Questions, comments before we go any further? Okay. So with that would be a good point to get into appropriation. So appropriation, of course, is one of the ways that we create meaning. We take something and we attempt to make it ours. Cultural appropriation is the process of borrowing and changing the meaning of cultural products, slogans, images, or elements of fashion. So appropriation can be anything, and sometimes it's appropriate to appropriate, and sometimes it's not. So here is my example for you, which is fairly recent. Adele at the Caribbean Carnival in London, in UK. She's not in, and I'm not really sure if that's in London, from September to September of this year. So I don't know if you've seen it on social media or not. She appeared wearing like bikini top, and then those bantu knots that are characteristic of, I understand, Jamaican culture more than anything. Like, what do you think? Is that appropriate appropriation? Gosh, that's a mouthful.
I don't think what she did was right, but I think that she wasn't intending to be mocking and like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It wasn't intentional. It was not about mocking. It just offended people, but she did not mean to offend them. Anybody else? Any other ideas?
From what I've heard from the perspective of Caribbean people is that they found it flattering. They felt like it was cultural appreciation because she was actually at a Caribbean event. And I feel like it was mostly like white people kind of dominating the conversation because they've just recently learned what racism is and are
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah, okay. So people people felt that a lot of people felt that it was more of an appreciation. She was at the Caribbean event. She dressed accordingly. She was showing kind of that she's part of the event, not part of the culture, perhaps. Anybody else?
So if it was deemed appropriation, would the fault fall on her or the company that's selling it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, well, I think the fault will be hers because that was her putting it on and creating that hairstyle. It's not necessarily, when you say company, I assume you're talking about like the company that made the swimming top.
Yeah.
No, it's I mean, no, I would think that the company, I know where you're going with that, and that's a good question, but it depends where she bought it and which company is that. I would think in this case it's her, but there are definitely instances out there where company appropriates and then they make money from that. Okay, anybody else? Any other ideas here?
I think it also depends a lot on like what was going through her head during the process. Like, is she going there just for the photos and to post that she was there? Or is she someone who's like really taken the time to understand that culture and appreciate that culture?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Personally, I think because it was a carnival, I don't see what's wrong with that. It's not that she appeared like that, you know, during her own performance or just decided to wear that for an event, any event. She was going there, whether it's for the photos or not, we cannot say. But because it was in the event that was supposed to that encouraged people to dress up and celebrate the culture, I would definitely give her a pass. And I would not see it as problematic. I also, from what I try to follow things like that because I teach that and because I really like that. From my understanding, it was very interesting because a lot of Americans were more and white, as someone said, white Americans were very judgmental of her, while a lot of people that are from Caribbean, whether still there or living, especially in England, they saw it as being completely great. Kind of as being.
I don't think she was there for the photo. You can see that this wasn't like a photo that she was like posing and ready for. Like, it clearly seems like it was like a spontaneous picture.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I agree. I see what you mean. Yeah. She, like, I mean, we don't know, but we also sometimes we need to give people benefit of the doubt, especially now with the current climate and the idea of appropriation. Sometimes it's, I mean, it's her hairstyle and the bikini top. It's not, it could be offensive in other contexts, but here the context is important. So, I mean, we can, you know, we can talk about that, and we know that sometimes appropriation are are really offensive. I think, to me, I often think about it in terms of capital gain, because if the appropriation had been created and then the person who appropriated benefited financially significant from that, I think that's not on. I think it's very, very problematic, and that issue of the capital really plays an important part. Well, let me show you a couple other appropriations. Appropriations are not new. So this is Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, you know, the famous thing that we study in art history or in history even sometimes. This is Salvador Dali, who clearly appropriated this is the Sacrament of Last Supper from 1955. And here we have a woman who is, he portrays his wife, Gala, as being Christ. So this is one example of the appropriation. This is a different one. This is Jose Antonio Burciaga and Last Dinner of Chicana Heroes. So he's a Mexican artist, kind of, this is the Che Guevara here, and he's creating this type of kind of a very different Last Supper. So these are, I think, completely on and completely to the point. And that appropriation, that kind of cultural quotation, I would say, makes the work of art more to the point and more relatable, and we all understand it a little bit better. So that makes sense to me. Another example, and you have it, I believe, in your textbook. This is Grant Wood American Gothic from 1930s, and I'm sure all of you have seen it at some point. I think this is the most, the kind of the most boring, but also most brilliant and ridiculous painting in the universe. Personally, I think I like it, but especially I like all the, you know, all the fun things that people had done with that. But here is one that becomes really interesting. Gordon Parks' American Gothic Portrait of Government Cleaning Woman Ella Watson from 1942 creates a very, very different. This is not just appropriation for the sake of appropriation, for the smile or for the additional meaning. This is something that really criticizes the issue of race, and at the same time shows us where we are as a nation, Americans as a nation, vis-a-vis race and vis-a-vis Americanness at that time, right? So this is a very, very different appropriation that happens here, very, very strong. And I would say that the way he does it, Gordon Parks, that is, he doesn't only appropriate, he also imbues that with a different and very different meaning. So it is an appropriation, but it's more than that. Questions, comments?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's just me, but I usually associate appropriation with like bad, like culturally appropriation, where it's not a good thing. But this I see more as like taking an influence for. So what is it more of?
We as a society, we kind of went more into the appropriation as being negative. And I think the appropriation, cultural appropriation now has more negative on it, connotations than positive. But trust me, that happened only in the last 10 years or so. Generally, appropriation, cultural appropriation and artistic appropriation has nothing negative to it. And when we, artists borrow from each other a lot, so are musicians. And it could be also a sign of respect and sign that I understand your work, but I want to be slightly different, but I also kind of, I see and I build upon that. So I would not necessarily, it depends, I would not necessarily come to appropriation or cultural appropriation from a negative standpoint, if that makes any sense, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I think the difference with it is like appropriation by itself means like what, like in this artistic sense, like kind of copying or like using something of someone else's. But like when you put the word cultural in front of it, that's like when it becomes negative.
I think again in our society it is, but even cultural appropriations not necessarily have to be negative. We think about them as, but they don't have to be. Yeah, we really, there are examples of cultural, and we kind of, we now there is this kind of dichotomy between appreciation and appropriation. We kind of use that. But again, appropriation doesn't have to be. But yeah, absolutely. Nowadays, cultural appropriation, we think about it as
Question. Is that the right way of referring to it? Because personally, cultural appropriation to me is always negative. The difference is cultural appreciation for me. So appropriation for me is always negative. The difference is the appreciation.
Yeah, that's, you have raised in such an important and such an interesting point. Again, yes, if you talk about it with someone and you talk about cultural appropriation, it's probably, at this point, it's probably negative. I don't like the duality between appropriation and appreciation, because it's like, you know, black and white. And I don't think every appropriation is very wrong and every appreciation is very right. There are people who appreciate and take on and they don't necessarily know that much about culture, and don't they know that what they take, but it's not this negative thing that we kind of we judge people by. So I would definitely kind of think about it in terms of not in terms of black and white. And I see it more and more in the media now, you know, appropriations versus appreciation. It's true, but it's just not the entire story.
Okay, so that's where like context comes in.
Yes, that's where the context comes in. But even the context, it's important to understand. It's important to understand the context. But I would at this point I would be very, very careful when I actually use cultural appreciation.
If I add something, so since I took a class 2 years ago, it was called INTD, Art and Politics of Mashup, and it's basically where they took intellectual property and made it their own. So they used the term appropriation when talking about that, saying, because it's intellectual property, just as a cultural appropriation is taking some aspect of someone's culture that's not your own and making it your own. So I do believe context plays a huge part in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. So look, just quickly to go back, look at this one here. Does he appreciate The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci? Balenciaga, he does. Does he agree? But he also stood up several times and talked about the fact that The Last Supper or any of the religious paintings ever not exhibited any of the Chicana people. And so he appropriates here. He takes it. Does he appreciate? Yes and no. Does he appropriate? Yes and no. So both appreciation and appropriation are present in this work. So okay, context is important.
Describe like positive appropriation by like the context and like the recognition and the credit that it gives to the original work.
Yes, if there is a credit to the original work, if there is very, very careful understanding of the original and one is original taken, what about the original that makes it important, and rather than taking it completely out of context or giving a little bit of context, then it becomes kind of okay, it becomes fine to appropriate. again, based on context. Shall we move on? These are good questions, good comments, and that's never easy. So let me show you another strategy. This one is called bricolage or make and do. So this is something that it usually used in the arts or in any type of cultural production. So essentially it is, we create something new with what we have. And what we have, this is important, is something that is available in hand and that we don't have to produce specifically. So very often it has to do with something inexpensive or even recycled. So in art, bricolage is the technique where works are constructed from various materials available or on hand, and it's seen as a characteristic of many postmodern works, postmodern being from 1970s and on. So I'm going to show you examples, and then I'm going to talk about counter bricolage. So this is an example of the work that uses bricolage. This is Michelangelo Pistoletto. He is an Italian artist, and this is Venus of the Rags from 1968. So what he did is this: he bought the sculpture of Venus from a garden center that is not it's not an expensive, it's not marble, just made of cement or something like that. And then she's standing in front of this kind of this pile of clothes, of rags, of clothes that would go normally, these secondhand clothes would go to the Third World in the 60s and be sold there. So Venus of the Rags kind of shows us, instead of thinking about the expensive, like the Venus normally would be part of the classical antiquity, he's showing us here this Venus as a recycled, as kind of what is it that we appreciate, what is it that we're looking at here, how everything could become secondhand, everything could become kind of older. So that's bricolage. He bought the Venus, but what really makes it bricolage are those piles of clothing that he just kind of borrowed from friends and had everywhere. Okay, so we're supposed to watch Jeff Koons. So this is a balloon dog from that documentary from about 2010. Can we call this a bricolage? What do you think? Anyone?
No.
Okay, why? Thank you.
It seems like specific material for the color and the structure.
Okay, specifically made, the color and the structure. Okay, great. Yes, so absolutely. So we cannot call that bricolage at all, because Jeff Koons actually designed that. This is, as you can see, in comparison to people standing, this is a very large size. It weighs several tons. If those balloon animals supposed to be kind of like disposable and light and very, very and small, he turns it into this kind of this large, weighty structure and sculpture. Accidentally, okay, that one is also sold in 2012 for $58 million. Jeff Koons is, you saw the documentary, you saw that. He is one of the quote unquote hottest artists right now. He's like an artist celebrity. There is such a thing as being a celebrity, kind of celebrity artist. He's widely collected by actually other celebrities and by museums. And he continues the idea of the pop art, right? He takes something from the popular culture and creates an artwork from that. So let's look at this one. This is his older work. I told you once, I told you twice, 1977. Can we think about that as a bricolage? Now, it is small. It's maybe like a 1 to 2 feet high. And these are actual toy animals and toy objects he went and bought in the store. What do you
I
think?
think we could think of that as bricolage,
Yeah.
because as opposed to the balloon dog, the material wasn't necessarily made for the art, but you could use it as art.
Absolutely. That's great. Yes. Remember, bricolage is something that making do kind of what we have. So yes, he had that, or he had to buy that, but yeah, we could think about that, kind of assembling these pieces of something that is readily available. So this is bricolage. Okay. So then let's look at counter bricolage, or kind of the idea of that. Counter bricolage is reappropriating of marginalized culture into the mainstream. So is bricolage essentially you take something that has very little value and you create something that has more value from it. Counter bricolage is you take something that is marginalized and you reinsert it into the mainstream. So my example of that is clothing that is punk style. This is circa 1970. So this is the old, punk was considered to be very much counterculture, kind of like clothing for people who wanted to be edgy, who wanted to be very urban and very edgy. And nowadays in 2000, this is 2013, but there are a ton of images like that also from now. Punk is reappropriated as part of fashion. So this is a punk on the runway, and that is an example of counter bricolage. And then from here, this is also counter bricolage. So this is just, it's a photograph of a contemporary, very young woman who is trying to look punk, kind of. But she's not so much influenced by this. She's very middle class. She's very, she wants to look edgy only in terms of her looks, not in terms of her behavior. So this is, again, she's kind of incorporating this counterculture into the mainstream. Questions, comments on that, on bricolage and counter bricolage. So the same could be done in terms of creating meaning. We could create media that is the same way. Then finally, what I want to do is to talk about the museums. Yeah, we've got some time. Very quickly, and give you some kind of idea about institutional critique. So museum, the word museum comes from 9 muses in Greek mythology, and it's kind of an inspiration. The first museum was created in ancient Alexandria and was something more like a university or a library. Now, what is a museum? Like nowadays, it is a place where we can say artifacts or important objects come to die, come to just be kept and cared for and occasionally exhibited, but they are no longer part of our culture. They no longer then go through the process of transcoding. They no longer acquire new associations or anything like that. They're not new uses. It then becomes that same, they kind of ossify. So the first museum that created that kind of ossification was here, I have that. the cabinet of what we call cabinet of curiosities, or the Wunderkammern, if you want to use a German word. These are, you don't have to remember any of that. Just look at the image here. I have it here. These were created, these were rooms that were created from collections that were the people who were wealthy, aristocrats, who sometimes traveled and sometimes just bought it from other people who traveled, would buy pretty much everything and anything that was unusual. So it was called Cabinet of Curiosities because you would have anything that was unusual. And that is considered to be the first museums. They were mainly, these first rooms, they were mainly not sorted or organized by in any way, shape, or form. And if they were organized by in a way that made sense to the owner. There was no real kind of understanding of how to organize these. So you would pretty much, you would come in and kind of enjoy all that. If you had guests, that was kind of a lot of it was bragging, kind of bragging, right? Look what I got, and then look what I paid, and look where I went, and there were stories associated with that. So these look essentially, sometimes we can think about them like trophies that were collected. This is kind of one of the smaller ones where you would keep small parts. The actual museums, this is the British Museum. The actual creation of the museums as we know them today is the product of Enlightenment and later. So late 18th century, early 19th century. And again, at first, most museums were natural history museums. They were kind of almost copying cabinets of curiosities, but on a larger scale. And slowly, they also started creating some kind of organizational system. There was some kind of organizational system behind that. Now, this is kind of the Egyptian room at the British Gallery. So you can see that slowly there's more organization happening. This is Rome. But slowly by the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, we see more and more exhibitions that look like that. Art comes into museum from the 19th century on, and more we see museums looking like that. So this is the type of exhibition that we called white cube, because if you take away all these wonderful paintings, we are going to have a white cube. It's just a gallery with white walls and neutral floors, and maybe some lighting at the top with also very white. That's all. So the white cube is important because then all our attention can go towards the painting itself, on the artwork itself. Now, a lot of museums nowadays have very large collections, and they exhibit only a small part of what they have. And one of the important points of all that is, how did they get all this? How did they get those wonderful works? How did they collect that? And what else do they have in their collection? So an example of an institutional critique that I want to show you is a project done by Fred Wilson. And really at that time, that was one of the first ones. So what he did, he's an artist. It was one of the first, and he became a curator almost like in spite of himself. So he was hired by Maryland Historical Society. And what they wanted him to do is to look at their collection and kind of create his own exhibition based on their collection. So they didn't want him to make art. They wanted him to be a kind of guest curator, but kind of throw all the ideas that curators normally have about organization and everything, kind of throw it away and just kind of think about it from his own perspective. So Fred Wilson is an African-American man, and Maryland Historical Society is one of the oldest historical societies in the United States. So what he started, he essentially rearranged their display to show how their collection portrays not only positive aspects of the Maryland's history, but also negative, such as having slaves, having African American people work for the white owners. So one of the things you see here is that this is highly polished silver, and these are the kind of the bonding, the shackles of the slaves. So he's saying, okay, who do you think cleaned all the silver? Who made that silver look so amazing? Whose work are we celebrating here? Usually we're celebrating the wealth of someone, but whose work actually went into that? So he also took a lot of, these are very kind of, this is again kind of talking about cultural appropriation. You see those are kind of the signs by the cigar stores that would be used in the 19th century, 20th century, and he turned them around kind of to not to show their faces, and kind of to turn them to show that, you know, this is not what we want to see now. This is another thing that he did. He kind of created, he put George Washington's monument in the middle of this room to show that there's a historical dimension to the room, that what was normally was very much ahistorical, just someone's interior. So he calls this, and this one here, he essentially, so on one side he has, these are great people who are, and all of them are white, of course, from the History of Maryland Historical Society, from the History of Maryland, and these are what he would think Black people, which do not exist. There is an emptiness instead. So he called it Mining the Museum. So he essentially kind of created this opened up and unraveled these histories and artifacts that people didn't think about and didn't look at. And this is institutional critique. Anybody had actually had a chance to see that link, for example, of the institutional critique that I put in the on Canvas? If you did, just speak up. No?
Yeah, I watched it. I thought it was not what I was expecting.
Yeah. Okay, watch it. Like seriously, it's only like 6 minutes, and you don't like it's actually, it's this dude that is completely not politically correct at all, and he's basically kind of rapping but also talking about different institutions, and he's really kind of funny, and at the same time what he says is absolutely is very, it's funny and correct at the same time. But this is the type of the institutional, what I'm showing you is a lot more kind of, you know, like academic institutional critique. What I was that link is much more of a kind of popular culture institutional critique that you would see, but it's the same thing. We kind of look at the institutions that we're supposed to respect, and we think about really what are those institutions and why in reality they are in our society. So kind of thinking about that is important. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about is here, the Guerrilla Girls, just because it will come up in your quiz. So just look at the part where it talks about it in the textbook as well. But essentially, I wanted to introduce that because it is also a really interesting kind of the example of creating different meaning. So what Guerrilla Girls is the collective of women who are artists, but the way they work as their artist practice is different from their guerrilla girl practice. They got together, they're older now, they got together from in, I think, late 70s, if not earlier. And they all wanted to be anonymous, so they essentially they started as advocates of women in the arts, because women were very poor, women artists were very poorly represented in the arts. And now they are a lot more intersectional. They also talk about race, representations of race and gender, etc. So they are kind of their signature look is this gorilla mask that they all wear when they perform or when they protest, and each of them has a name that is not her own name. She adopted the name of a woman artist from history. They are very known, very well known, because they've protested in New York City starting from the late 70s and early 80s. Whenever a large exhibition kind of comes into town, and they look for, again, representation of women, representation of race, representation of gender, etc. And they are just picketing in front of those museums and showing themselves. And they are very, very creative with their posters and their visual materials. Similar to Barbara Kruger, they put themselves in the billboards very often if they can afford it. They create a lot of posters, etc. So there's this kind of they appropriate definitely from the reclining nude, for example, from art, but they appropriate. Their appropriation, I would say, is very positive. It has, and it aims at actually improving the situation of women in the arts, of gender in the arts, etc. Okay, questions, comments, ideas. Okay, so let me stop sharing. So I will see you on Tuesday here, and then we're going to talk about the chapter 3, because we have 2 weeks to do chapter 3. It's gonna be a little bit less hectic for us. If you have questions about chapter 2 and quiz, etc., let us know. The deadline again, Monday night, to do the chapter 2 quiz. Any questions? Okay, then, yeah.
Do you want us to read chapter 3 before class on Tuesday?
Yes, please. Yes, please. And thank you for reminding me. Yes, please read chapter 3 before we come to on Tuesday. And let me know if you have any other questions.
Sorry, really quick question last. Do we just have the quiz and then just module 1 and 2, or is that due later?
Sorry, quiz.
What do we have for homework besides the quiz and the reading? Like, do we have to do the module 1 or 2 or no?
Let me just see. Sorry, 1 second. I'm kind of in the different headspace right now, so I was. Yeah, you do have to do it, but that's that's due on October 1st. So you technically have more time to do that. That's due on October 1st. So this is something that you should be thinking about, but you still have time to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. Okay. Anything else? Okay, then I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.